So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Red Team on the Road, Nashville. And also, thank you for hosting us because we're visiting you in your beautiful city. This is an amazing place, and I'm going to go off script here just a little bit. 4 years ago when I came, one of the things I was struck by was how many tower cranes there were from the airport to the hotel. And now that, 4 years later, it seems like all those buildings came out in an amazing way. This is a beautiful location. I think we can all agree on that. So, my name is Michael Wright. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of RedTeam Software. I'm also the original founder of RedTeam. One of the things I'll share about myself with you is that I'm probably on the wrong side of the room standing up here because I'm also a commercial general contractor. I still own a commercial construction company. And I've been a commercial GC for about 30 years now. I'll tell you something else about me. I'm notorious for going off script. And so I apologize in advance because I may look down, so I get all the things that Alicia wants me to cover in this introduction. So I'll be your master of ceremonies this morning. I'm excited about today's program. We've got a lot of great material for you, so I appreciate you being here. We'll be kicking things off with our opening session with Hugh Seaton in just a minute, but I want to cover some housekeeping issues first. We will be live streaming the opening session on YouTube. If you have any colleagues who couldn't join us, I think you've got a QR code up here. You can take a picture of the QR code and send it out, notwithstanding the prohibition on connecting to the Wi-Fi. We'll also be recording all the main sessions in this room for internal purposes, but we'd just like you to know that. For any questions throughout the event, please reach out to any of our event staff. You'll recognize us in the black Red Team shirts, other than me, of course. We do have some fun prizes that we'll be raffling off today, so go check them out at the registration desk if you didn't see them already. Lastly, we'll have 2 breaks before lunch with refreshments and snacks. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead as we're queuing up the live stream at this point. Welcome again to Red Team on the Road, Nashville. I'm excited to introduce Hugh Seaton. He is the CEO at the Link for our keynote session today. You will be diving into the hot topic of artificial intelligence and how it impacts the construction industry. Hugh has been in the industry for many years. Hugh is an experienced technology entrepreneur. And he's emerged as one of the foremost experts on AI and its application within the construction industry. His company, The Link, is an AI-driven application built for better utilization and management of construction specifications. Hugh's presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, so get your questions ready, and I'm going to join you for the Q&A session. So just raise your hand. One of our team members will bring a microphone for you to ask your question. And with that, Hugh, thanks for joining us. Take it away.
Hey everyone, good morning. So today I'm going to take us through AI from, this is so funny, the thing is right there, hang on a second. Kind of from the ground up. So what I find is a lot of the talk about AI is very high level, it's very kind of descriptive about where the world is going and we should be worried about this and worried about that, but nobody ever talks about what we're talking about, so I want to do that. A little bit about me. Michael did a great job. So I'm the CEO of The Link. I was at CSI for a bunch of years. I host a podcast called Constructed Futures, which is amazing. I get to talk to some great people. I do have a webinar series once a month where next week we're talking about IP issues in construction, right? AI in construction. Wrote a book, writing another book, and get to hang out with people like you too, so life is good. So let's start with definitions. I don't love it when people run around using words that nobody's ever defined for them. I've found that often in this industry and others, people do that. They assume that you know what they mean because they read an article somewhere. So what is it? Well, I like to start with this because this is what I see in all the articles, the McKinsey, the this and that, as if what we're talking about is just a silicon brain, as if it's like a human but shinier. And my point here is no, not like that. That is not what AI is, and it's really unhelpful for us to be thinking about AI in terms of comparing it to a human for a bunch of reasons I'm going to get into today. But what we want to keep in mind is AI is just software. That's kind of point one. It's just software. It's different from the software you're used to. It's not the same as Excel. It can do some unique things. It can recognize voices. It can pick out faces, whether we want it to or not. The thing that makes it different, you don't have to program it to do things. So everything you do in Excel, everything you do in Sage, whatever it is, somewhere in there there's a line of code that says press button A, you get result B. Always. Every single time. It isn't summing something up, it isn't depending on what you've given it, it will always do that. In contrast, the point of AI is you give it a bunch of data and it can do things, it can recognize things, it can predict things, so on and so forth. Stuff that we tried to do actually in the 70s and 80s with code and it didn't work. Some of the stories are hysterical. There was one group that tried to make a tutor and it was like 500 hours of programming to make 1 minute of tutoring. So needless to say, that's not a particular skill. And it gets super buggy. So that's kind of point number one, is that AI is just software. What makes it special is you don't have to program it to do everything it does. But the next kind of thing that falls out of that is under it all is math, not magic. So when you hear people talking about AI, I frequently hear them talking as if some little thing you saw in a demo, let's imagine that's everywhere and that's how the world is going to be. And the problem with that is, you're going to see in a moment, is what works in a demo doesn't always work in reality. And part of the reason for that is because the world is really complicated. And if there's ever been an industry that's complicated, it's construction, right? So you'll see things where someone does a cute little thing in a demo, but how come I never see it on the job site? It's because it doesn't work when there's real stuff going on, there's real complexity. An easy example of that, even though it's kind of AI, is Dusty Robotics. Really good product, but you got a sweeper. It's the one moment when everything is super clean, right? Is when they've cleaned it for layout. That's why you're not seeing a ton of other robots elsewhere, because they struggle with the complexity. Anyway, back to this. It's math, it's not magic. So when people start promising that it's going to make your marriage work and your back pain go away, keep in mind that it's just doing the narrow little things. Related to the math thing, another way it's really different, and this is important for folks that think about risk more than the average bear. Normal software is based on those instructions I was talking about. So there's a bunch of instructions that you can point to why it did this or that. AI doesn't do that. It's based on math, and the math is probabilities. So it's going to say, this is the likelihood that this is the right answer. In the background, you can see that's actually some machine vision. I just grabbed it off the internet, but it's boxing people and saying that's 90%, that's a person. It isn't 100%. It's never 100%. And what that means is, depending on your use case, there is variability. There's a possibility that it's not right. Now, the reality is humans are doing the same thing. Most of the time, we basically know. But when classic software says a thing is a thing, it 100% is a thing. The problem is, most of the world is too fuzzy for you to rely on 100%. So one of the cool things AI will do, it can still work when the world is a little fuzzy, which opens up a ton of possibilities. But it does mean that as contractors, as folks in this industry, we need to think about the fact that it introduces a new risk, something that software makers like myself and folks at RedTeam and others have to think about and say, how am I corralling that risk? How am I managing it for you? In a way you don't need to think about with normal software or classic software. What we do is we build various things. We tell you that there's this percentage, or there's a bunch of different ways we can handle it. The key thing here is that AI is not going to replace all software. It is not a silver bullet that is going to make everything not useful anymore. A spreadsheet is still just going to be classic software, because I don't need a bunch of data to say 1 + 1 is 2. I want it to always be 2. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of things in life where that's true. There's a lot of workflow software, there's a lot of management software where I don't need the fuzziness, because it's not fuzzy. This document goes there, end of story, let's just write some code and move on. However, what's in the document can be really fuzzy. As someone who deals with specs, I think you'll all appreciate on occasion they can be a little fuzzy. Being able to manage that is where AI helps us out. So that's just a recap. First, AI is just software. Second, it's different from classic software in that it's based on probabilities, and therefore it can handle fuzziness in the world. The next thing I want you to be aware of, because I hear this a lot, where people will say, oh, before you use ChatGPT, make sure your data's right. It's kind of confusing two things that are separate. I'm going to talk to you about what I mean by that. For about 10 years, we've been dealing with deep learning. This is why Siri works. This is why Google Lens, if you ever use that, it's really fun. This is why we were just playing around on your iPhone. There's a measure tool that will sort of measure between 2 points. That's all deep learning. Deep learning's been around a while. The idea is all of these, the other funny thing is all of these ideas have been around for like decades, but it's only recently that we have the compute and some other things to make it work. But anyway, deep learning for about a decade has been out there, and it's really good at recognizing something. It's really good at hearing, recognizing a voice and telling you what it's saying. Really good at the one next thing, not to get too deep into it, no pun intended. The thing to make deep learning work, though, is you need a ton of data. This is why you've been hearing until kind of recently, we can't really do AI, we certainly can't grow AI in construction because we don't have enough data. Your data's not clean enough, and you're making you feel bad about how you didn't do 10 years ago something you didn't know you needed to do, but now, God, I wish I'd done. So what wound up happening with deep learning, because data is such a thing, we wind up using APIs and models from people like Google. So if you saw something, it was probably built by Apple or Google or maybe AWS. In contrast, so that's important because when people talk about having enough data, they should be talking about deep learning and all the things deep learning can do. When it comes to chatbots and generative AI, which is a lot newer, this sort of kicked off with ChatGPT in November of 2022. They'd actually been around a little while. But what's interesting is they taught it to give good answers as opposed to gobbledygook, which is what OpenAI's big innovation was. We can get into what that means. The point is, it's different. Generative AI, the models are massively bigger, like massively. As an analogy, deep learning having 50 to 100 million parameters, which are just little parts of the model, is big but normal. For generative AI, you're talking about 1 trillion. So the numbers are many, like 6 zeros more. So the point is, there are two different types of AI out there, and they have different risks. So in the case of deep learning, your big risk is your data. Is the data covering enough? Is the data comprehensive enough? And I'm going to get into what happens when that's not right. In the case of generative AI, the real risk is, are you going to trust it too early? So going a little bit more into this distinction between the two of them. You can think of deep learning as turning data into information. So it'll see a dog and say, that's a dog, or that's a pipe, or that's a whatever. So our friends at like OpenAI, or OpenSpace, excuse me, and a couple of other folks, where they're using the photos and telling you this much has been completed or not. Now, some of that's working, some of it's not, but the idea behind it is this, is deep learning. In contrast, generative AI allows you to turn knowledge into action. And you're going to start hearing a lot more about this. Specifically, excuse me, it can dive into documents and pull out of it things. This is what we do a lot of. It can summarize things, it can extract things. So think about all the documents that you have across one project, much less a series of projects. Being able to go through that in a way that you might pay a human to, but you would never pay a human to. Right? You're going to start to see that you can pull things out of all of these documents you have and start to get knowledge and action and some other things. So the cool thing here is like, again, they do very different things. Deep learning is good at recognizing what that is, whereas generative AI is good at pulling things out and doing interesting things with them. And we're just in the beginning, a point I'll get to later. So why does this distinction matter? I hinted at this earlier. I like to talk not just about how wonderful the world is going to be, but what risks you should be aware of and what you should be doing, what questions you should be asking. So deep learning's been around, as I mentioned, for about a decade. The reason you barely heard about it is because it's really hard for people to use directly. Typically, you're using it inside of someone else's product. So Siri worked a little, and now it works a lot. Alexa, all these other things are using deep learning in there. Almost no companies other than banks and people that have like a heavily transactional business ever had enough data, because it's just hard to get a lot of the same thing and line them up. So the risks, as I mentioned here, are data quality, data quantity, and the other one that's interesting is problem size. So as a kind of a side and takeaway, one of the things to keep in mind with AI, just like if you were talking to a person, is if you ask somebody too much, you overwhelm them and they can't give you a good answer. The better you ask a question, the better the answer, especially someone who's junior or maybe can't fill in the blanks for you. One of the things I like to say about AI is imagine it's an intern who has really bad interpersonal skills. Like if you had an intern, yes, they can go look things up and find things for you, but they can't fill in the blanks about what an RFI should be or whether this spec is good or bad. They can go pull things from it, find things and search and all that, but they can't do what a professional can do. And that's the first time you're going to hear me say something that I'm going to say repeatedly, is it's really good at low-level stuff, like an intern would be. In the case of generative AI, again, thinking chatbots, large language models, there's been a lot of hype, and part of the hype is, this to me is like an AOL moment. So happily, most of you aren't old enough to remember this, but when 1995, when the internet first started to kind of be a thing, and you hopped on AOL and you're like, wow, this is amazing. I can talk to people, like the world is my oyster. Then you started really doing things and you're like, it was really cool, but it took years for it to get to be as really valuable as it ultimately was. It's a good analogy of generative AI. A lot of people, when they jumped into ChatGPT, whenever they did, in November or last year, whenever, suddenly were like, this is so cool. It can write emails for me, it can do this. And then you started really using it and you realize, well, it's good as a first draft. That's a good way of thinking about generative AIs. The key input isn't data anymore, it's knowledge. Maybe the knowledge is a good question, maybe the knowledge is a whole document, maybe the knowledge is your spec book. But you're able to directly interact with it in a way that we couldn't with earlier AI. It was too technical before, and now you've got these amazing tools. Everyone's heard about ChatGPT, there's also another one called Claude, there's a bunch of other ones out there. The danger with deep learning, as I mentioned, is that the data isn't good enough. Usually it's not complete enough. That's the big problem. We're going to talk in a moment when we say bias in data. We don't just mean interpersonal bias between people, we mean bias in terms of completeness, and I'll get to that in a second. The danger with generative AI is it sounds so good. So there's a story, a couple of them actually, of lawyers who went out and used ChatGPT to write their summary arguments, their closing arguments. Anyone hear about this? If you want to laugh, go check it out on Google. Go Google it, or ask ChatGPT. Turns out, it came up with a great argument, and the lawyer went ahead and used it, and opposing counsel said, hang on, I want to look at the case law that was referenced. It made it up, but it made it up in such a way that a trained lawyer said, wow, looks legit to me, and stupidly didn't check. So this is a big deal with generative AI, is all of the cues that we use to kind of tell if someone knows what they're talking about. Often it's how well is something written, is it concise, is it well punctuated, all those things that typically people that are professionals and are good at their job make things look pretty buttoned up. Well, AI does that out of the gate, even if it's completely full of beans. And that is the danger that we're going to find, is that the cues you look for incompetence aren't there. The cues you look for someone being a professional are there, but under it, they may or may not know what it's talking about. Now, happily, a lot of the making stuff up thing is being solved. Nevertheless, the big danger is that we give it more, we trust it more than we should. You can imagine a situation where someone's created generative AI that fills out RFIs for you, and the first 300 of them are great, but 301 causes you maybe RFIs are a good example, but you get my point. A document or an email or something like that, where it looks great, and people start to say, well, I can trust this thing, I'm going to go away now. And then 301, it says something insane, and now you got to clean it up. That's just emails. Like having it run things that are more important is what really makes people nervous. What if it's running engines or running machines or running power or running whatever? So most people will tell you that robot overlords are not the thing to worry about. Trusting it before it's ready is what we should be worried about. So they also have different challenges with using it. So the big one that I'll tell you is asking good questions. Most people go to ChatGPT like it's Google. Fair enough, you get an answer. However, you can get a really good answer the second question, third question, because it uses your last question to refine and answer the second one. They called it a chatbot because it's at its best when you're going back and forth. So if you take nothing away from this talk, know that you can go into chatbots and not just ask one question, but ask a series and often get really good answers, because you're making the problem smaller for it and you're giving it more and more context. So every question and answer is context for the next question and answer. The way to not have that keep happening is click the little button that says new chat. But if you're still in a chat stream, it's remembering what you asked it, and that helps it answer the next question. So you can get some really good stuff out of that. So try not to treat it like Google, unless you have to. If you are going to try to use a chatbot like Google, check out Perplexity AI. I think it is. It's insanely good. It's a chatbot. It's a search engine, but it gives you the answers it gives you are really cool. So anyway, much of that. When it comes to deep learning, where your challenge is having, like I mentioned, having enough data, but that's not all there is to it. So most people that have been in professional services are familiar with the trade-off of three things. You can have quality, you can have time, or you can have budget. You get two. It's not perfect, but an analogy here is you can either have the amount of data you want, a bigger or smaller problem, or accuracy. Those all trade off against each other. It's just like if you've ever done a survey, which most people don't spend all their time doing surveys. But the idea is if you want to get any really AI to do something, the smaller you can make the problem, the better. This is actually true for chatbots too. If you can break the problem into steps, you often get a better answer. So if anyone's looked at prompt engineering, there's a thing called chain of thought, where you break apart a problem instead of just saying, hey, give me a summary of the Financial Times, where that came from, but as opposed to saying, lay out the sections of the Financial Times, and then tell me what was in each, and then summarize it. So you're breaking the problem apart. Generally a good idea. And again, if you think about an intern, if you go to an intern and give them a problem that's too big, they're not going to know how to do it. So you'll often want to give them steps, and that's part of them learning. Think about that with generative AI as well, is that very often you're going to get better answers when you make the problem smaller or you break the problem into pieces. Typically, we don't have a choice about how much data we have. The other thing you can choose, though, is how accurate does it need to be. This is a really big deal as we think about integrating AI into workflows and real processes. Do I need this thing to be 100%? Or nothing's going to be 100%, but close to 100%. It's the difference between a recommender on Amazon and self-driving cars. Or even within self-driving cars, the difference between driving on the highway, which is a simpler problem than we thought it was, versus driving on side streets, which is a really complicated problem. On a highway, things generally look the same. Everyone's generally going the same speed. It's not that hard a problem. Going in side streets, there's a million different things there. There's leaves on the road, there's kids crossing the street, there's a ball, there's a dog, there's a tree, there's a this or that. So the point is, for driving on the highway, the accuracy they needed, they could handle. And they had a ton of data, because the data is very similar. In the case of driving everywhere, that makes the problem almost infinitely large, which is why everybody drove their own car here today. Finally, years later, some of you may remember in 2019 we were supposed to have self-driving cars, and we didn't. Finally, years later, we're getting there. Billions of dollars and billions of data points later. So this is sort of the point that this kind of underscores the point I was making, is the more accurate you need to be, the data just gets crazy. And there's a thing in software we call edge cases, and that's the things that don't happen a lot. That's why this looks like that. In the stuff that happens all the time, it's easy to get. The stuff that doesn't happen often, by definition, you have to do a lot of to get, which is also why they've been driving cars with LiDAR on them for almost a decade now. Also, though, beware of demos that look amazing because of this. Again, if it's in a controlled environment, a lot of things will work well. When you actually put it out in the field, there's a bunch of edge cases, let's call them. So now I've given you kind of a pretty good overview of AI as software. AI does math, it does probabilities, not deterministic, and then kind of the difference between deep learning and generative AI. So hopefully those are some frameworks that will help you when people talk about AI, and you can say, well, if you're using generative AI, I'm not so stressed about what the data is, because that's not what we're doing. It's what documents are going in, how well are we asking questions. One of the things that you shouldn't have to see, but you should know happens, when companies like mine put generative AI into a product, we're making it so that it can take in your questions as real humans ask them. You shouldn't have to become a prompt engineer to make normal software work. So we spend more time, believe it or not, on English than we do on data, which is really surprising. And test, so that when someone comes and asks a natural language question, it doesn't say, I don't know what that means, or that's too big a problem, or whatever. So the next piece I want to go through is trusting AI. So I've just said there's some risks. What does that mean when it comes to trusting? So the first thing I want you to know, and this is the hardest one because we're so wired to understand how other humans think. AI doesn't fail like a human would. That's actually a big deal, because we're really good at, when you're managing somebody, a lot of your job is understanding what they're good at, what they're bad at, and when something goes wrong, why it went wrong, so you can fix it. In the case of AI, your intuition is going to be wrong. This is again why I don't love those shiny robots as the thing that people say, look, it's AI. We have this thing called theory of mind. This is what allows you to talk to other people, understand what they're saying, finish their sentences and so on. We kind of know how other human brains work, so we can kind of model how that other person is thinking roughly. It fails with AI because AI doesn't work like humans do, and there's a very specific way that we think versus how it thinks. So it's not some big problem, or not some kind of abstract idea. Humans think in a top-down way. We have a model of the world that we use to navigate and understand things as they come in. This is why, excuse me, an experienced PM can walk on a job site and see things that somebody fresh out of school or fresh on the job site wouldn't even know was there, right? Because through experience, you know what to look for, you know what things mean. That's top down, not bottom up. In contrast, AI has none of that. It has no model of the world, it has no general understanding of the world. All it has is the stuff you gave it, and it runs some math and creates some predictions. So an example of this is in 2017, so it turns out a lot of times in college when people are trying to teach deep learning, they use dog breeds because there's some amazing data out, just huge data sets they can use. So you run into this a lot. So in 2017, some researchers were teaching their students, they created an image recognizer. So you could feed it a photo of a dog and it would tell you that's a Dachshund, or that's a Basset Hound, or that's a whatever. It kept confusing huskies with wolves. Now, a human would use our kind of top-down reasoning and say, well, they look alike. Kind of the same structure, certainly compared to a Basset Hound if you've ever seen one. You wouldn't confuse that with a husky or with a wolf. So we would look at it from a top-down perspective. The AI was not doing that. The reason the AI made that mistake is most of the photos of huskies and wolves had snow behind them. So it was saying, oh well, these are things with snow behind them. Do you get my point? Is that there was a problem with the data that made it make conclusions based on the data, not based on its understanding of the world. And this is there's a couple of things that come out of this. One of them is you never know where the data might be wrong. The second one is you often are not going to know why AI got it wrong because it's deep in some layer of training that is hard and it doesn't work like a human mind works. Coming out of that are two other things. One is for the foreseeable future, and I mean next 5 years for sure, you're always going to need a human in the loop. AI is not going to be good enough to be the final say on anything. The kind of obvious conclusion from that is we're at our best when we think about AI as a tool that helps you to think and get your job done, not as AI as something that's going to be able to replace even junior people. Because even somebody straight out of high school has enough knowledge of the world to be able to see stupid things, at least some. Some of you who've had interns are like, well, I don't know about that. But certainly compared to AI, the human mind is just so much better at looking at the general point. How many of you guys have ever seen when you put 3 dots and we see a triangle even though there's no triangle there? We do that automatically. It's called Gestalt thinking, or Gestalt, depending on how you pronounce it. AI doesn't do that. It doesn't fill in blanks. It doesn't look at the big picture. It only sums up what you gave it. So the general point here is always have a human in the loop, right? And no one's thinking about not doing that soon, but it's worth knowing that that's going to be necessary for the foreseeable future. So how do we think about AI in project delivery? So 2024 is already moving fast. I actually wrote that in December because I knew what was coming, and it has come. It's amazing how quickly the models, the use of models, all this stuff, it's moving incredibly quickly. What we're going to see during this year is kind of the next iteration, which is agents. You can already kind of string them together, but there's going to be much better tooling that allows people to do that. And it'll be the idea of not just asking it a question and it writes an email for you, but saying, go find me something complicated, and it'll go and create its own action plan. It'll execute that action plan and then come back to you and say, here's a report. So for example, what are the risks in this spec during the month of December? And then it'll say, well, I need to go look at the spec. I need to compare that against my list of risks or my understanding of risks and the weather and so on. It'll come back and give you a list. That's a made up example. But what you will find is that it'll be able to do more for you. More steps require less hand holding. it's still going to need a human to eyeball it. It's still going to need a human to so fully automating things, little steps within it for sure. Automating outputs, not with any time frame we care about. So, but the way I like to think of this is, imagine you bundle a bunch of tasks that you might give to someone junior, and now you're able to have AI do that and have the junior person do something else, something that requires human thinking, something that is a little bit more complex. I think you're going to find more and more of that. I think we're faced with a labor shortage that's not going away. That looks like it may be getting a little better, but it's going to be demographically, this isn't going away. So being able to carve out the things that you might have given somebody, so you don't have to hire quite so many, or you can get away without hiring. Interesting point here also though is, how many of you have used ChatGPT to answer a question, right? Or practice before a conversation? That's another one people like to use. So the point I'm making is, this very technology that's automating away some of the pieces that drive people nuts anyway, can also be used as a learning tool. And I think you're going to start hearing more and more of that. Now, people don't say to themselves, you know what I need to do today? I need to think, and I need to learn something. You'll have to tell them to do that. But the point is, the content's in there, the ability to deliver it is there. So things that you can imagine generative AI helping with right now. First one is I like to say, no more blank sheets of paper. So most people I know that use ChatGPT on a regular basis do it to write the first draft of an email or of something. It's the first draft, it gets you started. But the point here is that after the 5th time you're writing an email, or it's the end of the day and you're just not into it anymore, it's really lovely to have a draft to start from instead of looking at a blank sheet of paper, right? Like, I find whatever you're doing, it's nice to get, and often it can be crap. It's like, you know what, I'm not gonna use any of this. It doesn't matter, you're still starting somewhere instead of blank. And it's nice to look at something and know you're smart enough to say that's not good enough, so it gets you moving. Minimizing tedious search and summarizing. So this is actually some of what our product does. But the idea of being able to go find what you need, not just Control F, but actually go through one or a bunch of different documents and summarize what's in there. And then what we do is you click a button and it'll show you the underlying contract or the underlying document. I think that's this human in the loop. One of the ways it shows up is, I need you to connect me to the ground truth, so I'm sure nothing got overly summarized. But you're going to find that there's lots of value in this. We talk sometimes in construction about dark data. Have you ever heard that term before? But information that's locked up in PDFs that are 5 years old. Imagine if you could create or access AI that crawls through that and starts to give you 5, 10 years of historical information about performance or about what your company's done. Really exciting. I'm going to have to smoke through this. Sorry, Michael. Speeding up job analysis. Actually, I'll tell you what, I got too into this. So imagine you can automate paperwork, repetitive tasks, double checking information. I think AI is going to completely change the economics of project delivery, and I think it's going to start doing that with things that are documents and data. We're going to have to hold on is AI coming for your job? Short answer is no. The analogy, I'll close with this. The analogy that I use here is, everybody thought ATMs were going to make bank tellers go out of business. And it turns out that dispensing money was the least valuable thing that bank tellers did. So what wound up happening is, they wound up having more, not fewer, bank tellers, because the bank teller now was doing more high-value things. So they created more money and more value for the company. So it was the opposite. And the idea there is, if you are using AI, U plus AI is now more valuable than U plus Excel. In contrast, if you do what AI does, it's going to be a tough day. Got to go find something else. Go take another course. But most people don't. AI doesn't do what almost anybody. So the practical reality is that we're going to find a lot of value comes out of this, and a lot of eye-rolling tasks that people hate doing, you don't have to do anymore. So with that, I'm going to welcome Michael up, and we may have chewed into our question and answer.
No, I think we're good. So thanks, Hugh. That's really fascinating, and I know I asked everybody to prepare their questions. It's a pretty deep topic. I can't underemphasize how important this is to everybody in the room. And I'll tell one on myself. I didn't look at ChatGPT really until recently, and I'll tell you, I was really struck by how amazing it is. So I was really taken aback by the results that I saw when I personally set up a ChatGPT account. And then I started talking to folks on my team, and and pretty much anybody who's under the age of 30, they all knew about it completely, and they're using it in their jobs day in and day out. And I had no idea. And so that's just a caution. So anyone in here over the age of 30, I think you should definitely set up a ChatGPT account and really experience it and play with it. But given that, what other advice would you have for the people in the room today with regard to what can they do so that we don't get left behind by this?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One of the big outcomes of this is in your heads is knowledge that AI can't replicate. So definitely don't feel like your job is at risk. I don't see that anytime soon. I think that understanding what it can and can't do is easier to do than it sounds. So there's a few things. There's a number of places like Coursera if you feel like you want to dive deep, but just going checking some YouTube videos about how to do prompt engineering, or just prompting. Just go into YouTube and look up prompting. 8 minutes in, and you're going to say, all right, I know more than I did, and I'm not an expert in this. Isn't going to change my life, but I know more about what it's good at and what it's bad at. The other thing that I would encourage you to do, as Michael said, is get ChatGPT or Claude. It's $20 a month. I would do the paid one. And start playing with it, but play with it as if you were talking to a person, not Google. So ask it big questions. Ask it, questions about the back pain you have. It's wild what will come back. What's interesting also is, again, if it comes back with a book, you can say, can you say that shorter? And it'll give you a shorter version of it, which is helpful. Because one of the problems with Googling, right, is you get a bunch of blue links. And it's like, oh my God, now I gotta go through the blue links. So I think it's much more accessible, much more useful. That's the big one. The other thing that I like to tell people is there's a couple of books out there, and you don't have to read the book. You can just watch the book tour, which is hysterical. It's a guy named Jay Agrawal, and I'm happy to provide that name. Wrote a book called Power and Prediction, and it's a really good look. He's an economist. He's not a technologist. And he's looking at AI as an economic input, so you get away from the whole shiny robots thing and say, what are we really talking about? That's where that slide comes from, actually. Wrote another book called Power and Prediction, which is more. So either of those are great, and again, you can just go on YouTube and watch him talking about his book and get 80% of the value that way.
Awesome. So who's got a burning question for Hugh?
So you mentioned several times.
We have a microphone coming.
You mentioned several times that they're not coming for our jobs yet, but there is a level of concern with, in my perspective, of the entry-level jobs. Take it self-driving taxi that's going to eliminate the taxi driver. We already have these little things that eliminates the waitress at the restaurant. All automatic truck drivers, right? Huge part of the labor force is that entry-level, unskilled job that is going to be taken over. And, that's an important part of our economy from a lot of perspectives, and it's threatening.
So I'll take that one. This is an example, though, why I like the book I just mentioned, is they talk about not jobs, but about tasks. What I think will happen is tasks will get automated. On the way between the predictions that all truck drivers, if you recall, that was like 4 years ago. So far, nobody I know has lost their job. The reason I bring that up is, remember I showed that kind of chart about demos are here? There's a lot of that. There's a lot of folks that look at it and say, well, if it just kept getting better at the same rate, but it doesn't. So what I do think will happen is some parts of jobs will be automated. The task of driving from, I don't know, New York to Kansas, well, within New York, I don't think it's automated anytime soon. The highway, when they're just going straight, possibly, and people are trying that. The economics are harder than they sound. Making it work in a way that is reliable enough is a lot harder than it sounds. So I think there's a few things. One is, yeah, some stuff like, I'm not real good at navigating on the street anymore because Google Maps are right there. I think I'll survive without that skill. Like that's some skills I think we're gonna lose, right? Because they're automated and they weren't that important. And sometimes we get nostalgic about some things that actually aren't really that valuable. It's just how I grew up. So I think that a few things. One is some little skills might get lost, and some important skills might. Try finding someone who can work in wrought iron anymore, right? or even kind of some of the brick that you used to get Italian immigrants to do. So there's definitely skills that will get lost for sure, just like they always are as the economy changes and so on. What I think that gets offset by, there's an idea that experience is the best teacher. That's not true. Reflecting on experience, thinking about experience is way faster than putting 10 years into something. So I think that what you're going to be able to do is get assistants that help you learn more from the experience you do have. So I think that you'll wind up having people that are growing in a different way and learning in a different way for sure, but much more thoughtfully and much more intensely than maybe would have been true if they were just doing something rote. So it's not a simple answer. It's a real risk. One of the interesting things is the industry has more say in this, has a bigger vote in this than I think sometimes happens. I think we look at things like AI, like the climate or the weather or whatever, the sun, the moon, whatever. It's not inevitable, and more importantly, the way it happens isn't inevitable. I think we all remember when trade. I was in the Far East when some of this was going on. We just let trade happen, and it wound up having a really bad impact on our economy. I think that we can take that memory and say, we have more to say about this than just letting it happen as an industry. This is where associations sometimes help. This is where unions, depending on what you're talking about, sometimes help. But we have more say in how AI gets implemented than it might sometimes seem. That would be my argument, is that companies like mine are dying to make your lives better, not just force stuff on you. I think the days of forcing crappy software, not so much anymore.
So I love how you described AI as a tool, and I think that really that's the best way to look at it. My 17-year-old daughter is in high school, and she takes classes, and a lot of the curriculum in high school is writing things, and she will look at things, and she has an immediate sense that it's AI, and so they're so present to it that they actually see it differently. Whereas we might not have, I might not have the same context that she has to actually spot it out that way, but it's definitely something that young people use for leverage, and even me. Like now, if I'm going to write a letter related, a construction project, a dispute, I will often start with ChatGPT to get that first draft, as you described. And so I really look at it as a tool, but it's certainly not a replacement for having a person in the room. Any other questions?
What are currently like some of the apps or tasks?
What are currently like some of the top apps or tasks that we should be kind of looking to AI to assist us with as a tool, like in the market right now?
Yeah, I'm going to plug mine called SpecGPT. It'll help you find everything you need from your specs, but more broadly, the things that AI is going to be helpful with right now are documents. It's just way better at documents than it is at like drawings and so on. So I think there's a number of, there's a couple that do contracts, 2 or 3 of them. One is called Document Crunch, another is called Black Boiler. They do different things. One is like hunting for risk, the other one will help you write, especially subcontractor contracts. Trying to think what else is out there that's this sort of AI. There are other things out there, I'm sorry, on the spot, I'm not thinking about who else is doing some things, but I come back to my point that, actually, what's interesting, ICC has got you gotta pay for it probably, but they've got a little chatbot that helps you to navigate codes. I think you're gonna see more of that. I think what you're gonna start seeing is people that have a really deep well of content, AI will be a really good front end for you to go search. So think about ICC, there's a lot there. So being able to go ask it a question, I think is pretty cool, and they're pretty aggressive. They're gonna keep doing more and more of that. I think you're gonna find some of the associations and trade unions that have tons of content will make it more and more available. Usually it's from a chatbot, not something more sophisticated than that, but more is coming, for sure. The underlying engines, so actually today, OpenAI, at I think noon or something like that, is doing their next presentation of all the new stuff they're doing. And that'll mean people like me go, oh God, here we gotta go work again. So I think it's just gonna keep happening. But right now, the thing I would trust and feel comfortable with the most is documents.
How you doing? Question on the documents and all this other stuff that we're talking about. When do you see AI taking over estimating?
Okay, that's I don't think it's going to take over estimating. I think it's going to help with pieces. Yeah, I mean, the problem with takeoff is, I complain about how messy specs can be. Drawings aren't perfect either. So I think I know there are some really good, like Toggle AI, some of you may have come across. They're really good. There's just, you can't let them go. A human has to be there to make sure it didn't miss things. You'll find that there are areas that they're good at, and there are areas they're not so good at. Elevations, I think, is one of them. But there's a lot in a drawing, and there's a lot of variation in how people, use them or create them. So I think that, again, think of it as augmenting, not taking over, which is too bad, because a lot of times you get too many things to estimate. You're like, I can't do all this. So I think a way of looking at that is, what are the most repetitive, stupid things that are I'm sorry to use it that way, but like, what are the most repetitive, mindless things that are part of estimating that maybe we can automate so a human can focus on the things that are hardest or require the most judgment. What I didn't get to say enough, and one of the reasons why I think, I don't say jobs are safe, but I think that AI is not taking over, is experience and judgment. We don't have a clue how to replace that. And I think that that's just not, some of what an estimator does is weigh this versus that, and what are we doing, there's way more about it than what's in the documents. And no AI can come close to that.
So when you say the experience was developed by a human that was an intern at one point, so it was the AI level. So therefore, if we take that away from the human, then how is the new humans gonna have the experience?
Yeah, so what I was trying to say before is you're not taking it away. What you're taking away is the modern equivalent of a copier. My first job, I worked at a steel factory in Taiwan that is actually currently owned by Link and Electric, but wasn't back then, so I was welding in Mandarin. I would go and make, and it was a classic entry-level job. We would print something out on a dot matrix printer, and I would make 7 copies if it was one type of steel and 9 copies if it were another, and I would walk that around to all these different stations. I learned precisely nothing doing that, and it blew. It's a big factory, so it blew almost an hour doing that. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff. You learn nothing making copies, and no one makes copies anymore, but you get my point. So what we're saying is that a lot of what AI will do, you bundle up tasks that are meaningless. You're still in meetings with a PM. You learn more listening to how a PM reacts to something than you do, you know what I mean? Like you're modeling what they think is important, and you can't write that to me. You can write it down, but it'd be a long list. So I think that it's important to keep in mind. That's why I don't love it when they say 47% of jobs could be replaced. It's silly. It's the tasks within the jobs that will be replaced, but you're still human to human and looking at complicated stories, not making copies.
This is not a question, it's more of a comment. I am a very heavy ChatGPT user, and one way to use it is also, instead of starting with a draft, you have all of the experience in the world, you've been doing something for a long time, there's no one better than you to get the job done. So one thing that maybe you can do is, if you have a business review you need to write, or scopes of work you're putting together for a project, there's no one better than you to put that together. You have the experience. So put it all together and simply upload it to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT doesn't have emotion. It can review everything you wrote and give you pointers. Maybe there's something you're trying to get across to the other person or to the audience you're speaking to. So maybe ask, how can I convey the message that I want to convey with this item that I wrote down? And I recently put together a business review, and I uploaded that to ChatGPT, and it came back to me with things like, maybe add some insight on how you came up with your numbers, or so add more data to these items to support your conclusion, and things that I wouldn't think about to add to my document, but it just augmented everything that I added to that document. So that's the only comment I have.
Just as an aside, one of the things I will often talk about is when ChatGPT first came out, the chief information officer of EY, which is a big accounting firm, like within a month, he's like, this is going to change knowledge management. So one of the things that I will encourage all of you to think about is, are there types of knowledge that you can turn into a document that will help future project teams? Because everyone's most people anyway, have the experience of a lessons learned document that is on their SharePoint as an Excel spreadsheet that no one ever looks at. So someone had a great idea, they threw it together, and it never got used. And the reason for that is remembering something isn't just about storing it, it's about knowing when to go get it. And what AI is going to be good at, is now good at, is surveying and scanning all of that and pulling out what's relevant based on what you've asked. So one of the things I think every contractor should be thinking about is what type of knowledge makes us better or could make us better than everyone else? And can we pull some of that? Is it only a guy, is it only a woman who's just been at it so long that they're our secret weapon? Or are there things that you might be able to do in an interview or pull out that can actually help each project team to execute better? Companies have been trying to do this for a long, long time with their document that's the ex-contractor way or how we do things. Wonderful. Those were written so that you'd read them like once and hopefully remember them for the rest of your career. Now you get to take that, maybe distill it a little bit, and add to it and say, I can now put this into, whether it's a chatbot, whatever the product is, this can now be part of how people get questions answered. We can filter it through what makes us special. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Thanks, Hugh. I think we're actually at time right now. One more quick question.
My thought is, are people going to become dependent on AI? Like, can you tell me your mother's cell phone number? I can't.
That's crazy. That's the only one I could. proves your point. Proves your point.
I don't know phone numbers anymore.
Yep.
When I was in high school, I knew 50 and could remember them, and I don't anymore. It's just like you said, driving around town. You tell me a street in Nashville. I've been here 20 years. I got to get on my phone and
Yeah.
find it. I become dependent on the technology, and that's my thought. In this, are people going to become dependent and less knowledgeable because they're dependent on the software?
So I would just say that yes, 100%. Just like you're dependent on all the machines that allow you to build 20-story buildings that you couldn't do with your hands. The question is it net allowing you to manage more with less? Is it helping the question is it you only losing capability, or are you gaining things in terms of how much you can handle, how much you can manage? I think that in 2-3 years, the idea of having documents, project documents that aren't 100% in agreement with each other will either be a choice or it'll be gone, because I think you'll be able to automate a lot of that. So you'll get something. There'll be a whole type of risk. Hopefully will go away, or at least be mitigated. I mean, that's a good vision. We'll see where we get. So I think the answer is 100%. People will become dependent on it like we are on other machines. The key is for us to make sure we're getting more than we're giving up.
You said earlier during his presentation, he said AI helps us reveal dark data. And you said 5 to 10 years ago, lost in a PDF somewhere. I would say, all of us in this room who have construction specs on all our jobs, that's essentially dark data, right? And I think there's so much dark data in the jobs we are doing today. I think definitely the answer to your question is yes. I think we will rely upon it, and it's going to become a choice for us as contractors. Are we going to leverage these tools to be better at doing what we do? The reality is people are taking risks every single day, going off memory or not actually looking at the contract, not actually looking at the specs. And so I think that's going to change. So we are at time. So that was a great conversation, Hugh. Definitely something really valuable information for us. And I will say on behalf of the industry, thank you for what you're doing. You is really a voice, really helping us as contractors and as an industry understanding AI and how it affects our jobs now and how it affects us in the future. So with that, we are going to take a 5-minute break before our next session, which is